Hey everyone, Raptor Swank here, and today we have Metacheck January 13th. This is a show where I look at the meta and talk about a couple of decks I find interesting. First, top of the episode here though, some quick housekeeping. So, for anyone who doesn't follow me on Twitter or anything like that, I have a new job that started this week. So, a lot of things happened. It's been a bit hectic, bit crazy, but I'm going to try to get the usual episodes out this week, but that's why you're seeing this on Wednesday, and there's a very good chance On the Grind will be on Saturday as well. Schedule might be hard to maintain for the next couple of weeks because I'm on a training schedule and then I'll get my full schedule and that might mess with things. So if things don't or videos don't come out exactly when you expect them to for the next couple of weeks, just understand that's what's happening. But I'm going to try to deliver Metacheck every week, On the Grind every week as I have been, and I've got a number of other things I would like to get out as well. So because of this, there's also only going to be 2 decks this week. I didn't get to play nearly as much as I wanted to, but that said, there's a couple of decks I do want to talk about, so I'll talk about those, but 2 decks instead of 3 this week because of this as well. Still planning on the 250 sub video. I know we're at like 260 something now, but that's still in the works, and I'm hoping to get it out by this weekend because I'm thinking about doing a stream on Monday, i.e. Martin Luther King Day for those in the United States. Good chance that I will try to do a stream that day. No promises, not 100% set in stone, but I'm going to try. You can find my Twitch in the description if you want to get notified if that happens, but there'll be more details on that in the 250 sub video as long as I get to that. Hopefully everything works out. It's been a bit of a hectic week. But also, new patch. Normally I'd go through the full patch notes, but this is a very small patch. It's a good patch, but it's a very small patch, so I'm just going to cover the changes real quick. First, Pack Your Bags gets stuffed, or does it? I think that this change is both underrated and overrated in what it will do for the game. I think some people are saying that Pack Your Bags and Go Hard essentially is dead a little bit prematurely. I don't think the card is dead. That said, this is a huge nerf. I think some people are undervaluing that. I've seen some people be like, well, 5 mana for 5 damage to everything is still amazing. That's absolutely true. That is very cost effective. It's the reason Decimate gets played. In fact, Pack Your Bags is a much better card than Decimate is on just pure value. Problem is, you have to cast Go Hard 3 times to get to Pack Your Bags. So you can't just look at Pack Your Bags 5 mana for 5 mana. You have to look at what it's actually going to do. So here's the big nerfs right off the bat. First off, Zap Sprayfin cannot tutor out Pack Your Bags. So once you level up Pack Your Bags, but you don't have any, you're not going to be able to tutor more off of a Zap Sprayfin anymore. So things like Chronicler of Ruin are going to lose value, but basically that's not going to be that huge because you can still tutor out Go Hards, which is the whole reason for tutoring it out, and then hopefully you already have another one in hand for Pack Your Bags, or you can do the tutor effect before you cast that 3rd Go Hard, so that you get the 4th one, then cast Go Hard, then you can Pack Your Bags. Another huge nerf, though, is that going from 1 mana to 5 mana is obviously a huge change. First off, Zap Sprayfin has a tune, so part of what made it so good was not only that it could tutor up a 1 cost, which Pack Your Bags still was, but then you could also cast it. So that change now means that you're not going to be able to cast off that extra mana. 4 more mana is actually a huge change because of the fact that so often what ended up winning me the game was, say, like Zap Sprayfin, tutor up Go Hard, gain a mana, and then like Chronicler of Ruin, kill it, summon it again, get another mana, tutor up another one, then you Go Hard, Pack Your Bags with the mana you got. That's not going to work anymore because it costs way too much to Pack Your Bags off that. Big change number 2. I've been a huge advocate of Commander Ledros in the list. I still think he's probably the best way to go with Go Hard, even after these changes. But you can no longer cast Commander Ledros and Pack Your Bags in the same turn. That is a pretty huge difference because one of the best ways to win was play like a Commander Ledros, half their health. If they're down to 10 health or lower, that's going to drop them to Pack Your Bags range, and then you can Pack Your Bags to kill them. I'm pretty sure that was even relevant in episode 3 of On the Grind, where I did that exact play where I played Commander Ledros. They tapped out, so I knew I could get the Pack Your Bags through, and I killed them and wiped their board, etc. with the Pack Your Bags. So that is very valuable. So not being able to do that anymore is definitely going to hurt the deck. That said, again, 5 mana for 5 damage to everything, including your opponent's Nexus, is insanely powerful. So I would still expect the deck to be playable. If this is a deck you like, if you really enjoy what Go Hard midrange is, or tempo is, you can still definitely play the deck, I think, because Pack Your Bags is going to be really valuable. And in fact, I don't think it needs a huge change to the list to make it good. I think you're still better off with Ledros. basically Chronicler of Ruin is probably not worth running anymore because it's just not quite as good to do the flicker zap effect, essentially. But all in all, I think the deck's still in a decent spot. Other really awesome thing, Co-op Lab. I have wanted co-op in the game for a very, very long time. I would prefer some permanent game mode that is similar to Commander from Magic the Gathering, but this is something. I'm glad they're finally adding some sort of thing to play with other people. That should be really awesome. I'm excited to try it out. And in fact, if I do end up doing a stream on Monday, I don't want to say this because I'm not 100% set on it, but there is a possibility that I will be willing to play co-op games with viewers if people are interested in that. More details to come. If I get the 250 sub video out there, I will definitely go into all this stuff in that video. So keep an eye out for that if that's something you might be interested in, because if I'm doing it or not, it'll be in that video. So there's that. Now let's talk about Targon Plaza. Update on the deck since last we played it. As I mentioned, didn't get to get nearly as many games in as I wanted, but I still got another 6 games in on the deck, and unfortunately went 3-3. Although I think that's not too bad once you hear why it reached that point. I think the deck is still incredibly good. I think if you're looking for a deck to grind out, Targon Plaza is an excellent choice. And in fact, even going 3-3, that still leaves us with a total record of 8-3 for a 73% win rate. Not counting normal games. I played a bit of normal games since last recording. I played a ton of normal games before recording last. But I don't actually track my stats on that. So can't really tell you where we're at with that. But looking more at the 3 games, I lost to the Mirror Match, which is always going to be a 50-50 matchup. I lost to Plaza Scouts, which that brings that total to 50-50 as well. And honestly, that's the one game that I think actually is kind of indicative. We'll go into that more in detail in a second. And then I lost to Go Hard, which A, just got nerfed, and B, they had the miracle hand. They actually played Twisted Fate on turn 4, and they red carded with it to kill my Zoe, and I think 2 other units died to this. I think they may have had a keg or something like that. They leveled up Twisted Fate in 2 turns. Like, that was my attack turn that they played Twisted Fate on, so the next turn, even if I had still had Zoe or a Serpent or something, I wouldn't have been able to kill Twisted Fate till the next turn, and by that point, he was already leveled up, because they played, like, Pool Shark, then they Glimpse from Beyond, they Salvaged, and they Zap Spray Finned all in the course of those 2 turns, and they leveled up Twisted Fate instantly. It was so incredibly fast, and a leveled up Twisted Fate is one of the hardest things the deck is going to deal with. We have ways to deal with it. Plaza for Challenger or Serpent can all deal with the Twisted Fate. I didn't find any of them. I didn't have a Serpent, I did not have a Plaza, and I wouldn't have even had the window in which to kill their Twisted Fate because of how fast he leveled up. So all of those are a huge problem, which normally you shouldn't really count on that being the big problem that it was. So they really did have the Miracle Christmas Land, but what makes it so bad for you, just to make this clear, is that your endgame is heavily dependent on usually some sort of Celestial threat, your best being the Great Beyond. And in fact, I hit Great Beyond with enough power to actually kill my opponent incredibly quickly because I already had them low from an aggressive start. But it doesn't matter because it has Spell Shield. But what they're going to do is cast 2 spells. Well, they're going to cast 3 spells in a turn. The first spell is going to draw them a card, sure. Then the second spell is going to red card and strip the Spell Shield off Great Beyond so that when the next spell comes down, they're going to gold card Great Beyond and it's not going to hit them. The fact that they can get at burst speed 2 effects, one that will easily strip Spell Shield and then one that deals with a threat, makes it incredibly hard for us to deal with Twisted Fate. It basically shuts down everything that our deck does, so that is your biggest concern in that matchup. But again, they lived in Christmas Land, got him leveled up instantly without losing too much to do that. So really good for them, really lucky for them, and extremely unlucky for me that I didn't have any of the challengers or combat spells to deal with that. So I just had the aggro package with some late game stuff off Star Shaping, which is great, but not in that specific scenario. So that was highly unfortunate. Beyond that, the wins were to the Mirror Match, so 50% win rate, doesn't say a lot. Zed Yasuo, really weird deck, really interesting, took a long time, but was pretty much in control of the game the entire time, and ended up winning because Spell Shield is incredibly hard for them to deal with. And then Zoe Swarm, which is a deck I'll cover in more detail later, but I think that is just a great matchup, because they're kind of like our deck, but less efficient and less versatile, since we have so many different ways to go about things. that deck is not going to be quite as good. The version I ran up against is much better at leveling up their Zoe, but that doesn't really matter if I can control the board, which we can do very easily with things like Plaza. So, all in all, I think the deck's in a great spot. I think two of the losses, one was the mirror match, so that's just to be expected, and the other one was Go Hard living in Christmas Land, and that got nerfed, so not terribly worried about that. Plaza Scouts, I think, is an actual concern for the deck, because they can deal with our aggro package fairly easily, and if we can't deal with theirs, which it can be very hard for us to deal with, especially if they have a Misfortune, and they were on the quick level Misfortune plan, and that's what caused the issue for me, and they had a Relentless Pursuit as well, so they were able to get off to the races quickly. I even had challengers to deal with the Misfortune, but then they had the barrier for her, so I wasn't able to kill her, and it's very hard for us to kill something through multiple routes, so that was a huge problem, and they were able to level up Misfortune. Once she levels up, it's game over, and that's kind of the problem with Plaza Scouts, is that their units are bigger than we can deal with often, because it's hard for us to deal with a Misfortune, because of the fact that she has 3 health. We can deal with stuff 2 health and under very easily. Misfortune's a lot harder. We have to trade a high-powered unit, and if we haven't found our Mountain Goat, it's going to be a lot harder to do that in time to prevent her from leveling up. So that's a big concern. Plaza can really mess up things by killing our Zoe or other units that are really strong. If we can buy till the late game, our late game is better than theirs. We have Star Shaping, we have Aurelian Soul. All of these things are really good for winning the late game. But the problem is we can have a very hard time making it through the mid game against them because of how big their board gets and how durable their units are. So I think that's actually a matchup to be concerned with. And I think we kind of saw that demonstrated in the On the Grind episode last week, because we had many opportunities to lose that game, and we ended up just narrowly squeaking it out, which was great, but I think that's definitely a matchup that you should feel a little bit concerned going into. Now, general thoughts on the meta. Obviously, Go Hard's going to be a huge change. I still think the deck is going to do way better than a lot of people are giving it credit. I think the furthest it will drop is maybe to B tier from where it's at now, or where it was prior to this patch, where it was the best deck. I could see it going all the way down to B tier, but that's still an incredibly good deck. So, or at least still very viable if that's a deck you really, really like. I think what the big takeaway is, you don't have to be forced to play that deck. It's no longer like the best option, bar none. There's a lot of other decks that are probably going to be better, which kind of brings me to the other things. One, I've seen a lot more Targon Plaza, and I've seen a lot more Plaza Scouts. So we're seeing a lot more Plaza-based decks, and I think Targon Plaza is going to be a bit of a rough deck. So be prepared for that matchup. You saw how good it was when I played it. If you watched the On the Grind, if you didn't, you can check that out. I will have the link posted probably at the beginning of this, or maybe right now. But basically, the deck is really, really strong, very versatile, lots of different ways to go. And just in general, there's a ton of Zoe decks on the ladder right now. At least in my experience, I saw plenty of Zoe Lee Sin. I saw plenty of Zoe Fiora. I saw plenty of Zoe Draven Swarm. I saw plenty of Zoe Targon, like Plaza. Like, there is so many Zoe decks right now, and I think she's probably going to get nerfed, because I do think she's actually better than she should be. It's very hard to deal with her, and because she's elusive, she can get damage in very quick, and she can get off to the races very quick, and with Go Hard getting nerfed, that was a big card that could keep her in line. So I think Zoe's going to be pretty problematic for the format, but right now I think the meta is in a decent spot. I could definitely see it warping by the next balance patch, though, where Zoe becomes a huge problem. We'll see if that ends up happening, but that is my biggest concern. But right now, I don't mind the meta too much. Biggest problem with it is probably that control decks are really kind of pushed out of the meta, so it's just a aggro combo mid-rangey thing, and the best metas are where you're going to be able to have a lot of versatility in all of those spots, and I don't think there's a lot of great control decks right now. I'd be tempted to try peak control, but right now I don't necessarily think it's in the best spot. Although if mid-range does trend more, that is usually where that deck is going to perform the best. But generally speaking, it's a pretty mid-rangey heavy format right now, which is why the decks I'm going to be covering are in fact aggro decks, something a little bit different. I know aggro is kind of my bread and butter, but these are a couple of decks that I saw some interesting changes to, some more major, some less major, and I thought they made for some very, very neat decks, even if they're not necessarily the best decks. So the first deck we're going to look at is Discard Aggro. Now you can see this is pretty traditional. This is almost exactly the list that we've come to expect for so long, and so many well, actually pretty much a year now since this deck's been around since the beginning of the game. But one huge inclusion, because this is a huge new card for the deck, and that is Survival Skills. Survival Skills is incredibly good. This deck runs people down fast, especially with Jinx, and the ability to keep Jinx alive through one form of removal using Survival Skills is a huge boost to the deck's performance now. That's insanely good. And the fact that you could always hardcast it as well, that's very rare, not going to happen often, but can be a great answer to things like Withering Wail, which were the biggest, or Withering Wail or potentially Avalanche as well, which were the biggest predators for this deck originally. So that's a huge boost to the deck. Definitely worth running. Now, you might play with this list a little bit, depending. You might want to run more Battlecasters, but the zero cost and low cost, like Rummage, ways to pitch Survival Skills are pretty important to what the deck is going to be trying to do, so I wouldn't mess with that too much yourself. But, again, just an incredibly good boost to this deck. So, if anyone's unfamiliar with how you play the deck, it is just aggro to its core. This is, you're trying to run down all of your opponents. Now, there are rare circumstances where an aggro deck might be going faster than you. We have the potential to be one of the fastest aggro decks, but that doesn't mean we can't get outrun. And when that's happening, Jinx is your best bet. If you're worried about the other deck being faster, Jinx's ability to fire the rocket and deal damage to all of your opponent's units, very good against other aggro decks. But generally speaking, into basically every matchup, you're going to want to run them down. Poro Cannon is going to be a lot better against mid-range decks, where the ability to have elusives is going to be huge. Flame Choppers will also be good in those matchups. Crowd Favorite and Augmented Experimenter can be good. And again, Draven Jinx, really good in that matchup because Draven can attack safely. And Jinx just will win the game late by constantly rocketing your opponent's Nexus as long as she lives through challengers, essentially. So that's your blueprint. Against Control, again, just go fast. And Survival Skills is a nice new trick for this because a lot of them will have forms of board wipe, and this is a good way to deal with that to keep yourself alive for that hopefully lethal hit. So keep that in mind, but generally speaking, you're just going to want to be pedal to the metal, try to run them down as fast as possible. So that's Discard Aggro and where it's at right now with the change of that new card. The other deck, as I mentioned earlier, Zoe Swarm. This is a really neat deck. Certain versions of this deck, not the one I'm showing you right now, but certain versions of this deck are actually probably the best Zoe decks out there if what you care about is leveling up Zoe. If you run stuff like Mountain Goat instead of Noxian Fervor or Visions, probably Visions is the best thing to replace if you're going to go that route. But if you run Mountain Goats, then you have the gems as well as the spinning axes as well as like all the other things from your Celestials with Spacey Sketcher and Zoe that can just really set you up to level up Zoe very quickly. So, there's that. What you may notice with this deck is it kind of looks like Decisive Aggro, it kind of looks like Targon Plaza, but it's a bit different. It's got a little bit of even discard aggro in there with the Visions, the Battlecasters, the Draven's biggest fans. This isn't a great Visions deck, but with things like Spinning Axe and Spacey Sketcher, it's not that hard to discard it either. It's also not a great Decisive Maneuver deck, which is why there's only 2 copies, because we only have 2 Overwhelmers in Crescent Guardian and Crowd Favorite, unless we can level up our Draven or find an Overwhelmer off of Zoe or Spacey Sketcher, which there is the Charger, so that is possible. But what we do have over Decisive Aggro with this shell is that it's got a much better low-curve aggro package. Like, Decisive Aggro is looking to outvalue your opponent with big overwhelm threats that can really run them down in the late early to mid game, essentially, and sets up beautifully off Decisive Maneuver. This deck has the crazy turn 1 Spacey Sketcher, discard something like, I don't know, Visions, etc., to play or get a Celestial, play a bunch of Starry Scamps, play the Celestial, play Battlecaster the next turn, and just run them down with a ton of damage early. So it's got that over Decisive Maneuvers or Decisive Aggro, which has the kind of weaker early game for just high-value units. I might suggest something like Iron Ballista over Crescent Guardian, but Crescent Guardian can do a little more damage than Ballista. Generally speaking, this is just a super aggressive deck where you're looking for that crazy Starry Scamp start, or just looking for Zoe to outvalue your opponent while setting up great overwhelm threats, and then maybe winning off of a decisive maneuver. Against other aggro decks, you're going to want to try and keep a heavy board state. Early Starry Scamps are great, Spacey Sketcher's great, just ways to basically run your opponent down while giving you plenty of blockers to slow your opponent down if you need to. Zoe should be great into most aggro decks because they're not going to have a ton of ways to kill her, so she should be able to get a lot of value. Draven can attack safely, which is good, but generally speaking, you're going to want to just try to outboard state them and also run them down at the same time. Against mid-range, you're going to look to punch a ton of damage through, and this is the same for control as well. You're just going to look to punch a ton of damage through. Against mid-range, overwhelm threats are going to be good too. And Zoe's going to be really good for getting a bunch of damage through. Against control, you're really just going to care about the most damage you can do as fast as possible rather than great overwhelm threats. Decisive maneuver is going to be better against mid-range as well. But in both decks, you're going to look to do a ton of damage, or both archetypes, you're going to look to do a ton of damage early, and then use Decimate and Fervor, a combination of the two, just to run your opponent out that last bit of health by either Noxian Fervor, something that they're going to gain life off of, or that you're going to lose anyways, or just decimating through whatever blockers they have, just not caring, doing a ton of burn to kill them. Big problem over something like Targon Plaza is that while they have huge spell shield threats, the only way we're going to get the big Celestials is if we can level our Zoe and get Behold. And also, we don't have a lot of great ways to benefit off Zoe. The only real keywords we can give is basically Overwhelm, and Quick Attack if we can get a Draven. But otherwise, all of our other keywords are going to have to come from Celestials that Zoe finds. So that can be a bit rough for the deck. That said, lots of great low-curve Celestials you can get, like the Charger, or even Serpent can be good in certain board states against control where they're not going to have a lot early. Messenger is fine because it can draw you more cards, but the Trickster is really, really good for having that elusive threat, and if you level Zoe, you can give elusive to everything else, and then you just really take over the game. But this is just basically a very unique take on Zoe that's way more aggro-focused than the other Zoe decks are, because Lee Sin is more combo-focused, Targon Plaza is basically a mid-range deck. Sometimes you play more like Control, but it's mostly a mid-range deck. And then, obviously, Fiora Zoe is a combo deck. So most Zoe decks are going to be some form of combo. This is an aggro deck. Just pedal to the metal, run your opponent down. So it's a pretty neat take on Zoe, if that's what you're looking for. But all in all, these are just a couple of neat aggro decks you can go with if you're looking to be a little more aggressive than some of the slower decks that have been prominent lately. But that's that's the decks for this episode. Thanks for watching the video. There's a link for the decks in the description below if you want to try them out. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe for more videos just like